welcome to another episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. Today's guest is Dr. Sonia Ramamoorthy, who is a professor of surgery at the University of California in San Diego, where she has spent most of her faculty career. She is also one of the most prominent leaders in the American Society of Colon and Rectal Surgery, and one of the best-known colorectal surgeons, both nationally and internationally. She has managed to navigate a career very successfully, both professionally as well as balancing family life, along with her husband, who's also a physician. So her experiences of doing this are going to be very interesting to hear today. So without further ado, let's join the conversation with Sonia Ramamoorthy. Evening, Sonia. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to see that you're still gainfully employed.
Unfortunately, and taking call.
Yes, indeed. Well, thanks very much for taking the time today to join the millions and millions of viewers that we will no doubt have for this.
I love the background with the cars. That's amazing. Get some junk out of the way.
Yes, all of the embarrassing stuff you can move out of the way. So this this venture is going to talk to and is talking to a series of surgeons from around the world, not just the US, but Europe and Australia and the UK and Ireland, etc. And it's called Surgeons' Lives because although we will, of course, talk about some aspects of professional life. As much as anything else, I'm interested to talk to people about what else makes up their being, if you like, because there's plenty of opportunity to read people's CVs, etc.
Yeah. Well, good for you. That's awesome, and thank you. What an honor. I'm sure I belong in the international, international group of surgeons, but hey.
No, we're very, I'm delighted to have you here. So what I normally ask people to do, and I will ask you to do, is just to set the scene by giving us a brief story that starts with the words, I was born in.
Okay. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts. And my parents were immigrants from India. They both came over when they were fairly young. My dad came over when he was 16 on a boat, and my mom came over when she was 18. So they spent most of their lives in this country. Yeah, they were in Boston, having traveled from the West Coast. Both they'd gotten married in the 50s. One is Hindu, one is Muslim. So they got married in a Lutheran ceremony, which made for a really interesting upbringing. Neither family was really present because they weren't excited about the choice. Yeah. But they both did well for themselves. They worked hard, classic immigrant story. And my dad was at Harvard. My mom was at Tufts pursuing a biochemistry degree, and had my brother, and then they had me. And we lived in Boston for about a year or two before my dad had gotten his first job in Texas. And so I lived in Texas until about kindergarten. And then he was an engineer. He got an engineering professorship at Berkeley. And that's pretty much where I grew up, in the Bay Area then for the remainder of my life. I'm the middle child. I have an older brother who does a lot of kind of startup tech, smart person stuff. And then my younger sister, who is more working for nonprofits. More like a person that is in the field of development, getting philanthropic support for nonprofits.
You went back then east to Boston again.
I did, yeah. So I finished my undergraduate degree at Berkeley, and then for a while wasn't sure about medical school. I went to culinary school for about a year, and that kind of being out there in the real world in a restaurant where you see every walk of life really kind of can. At the same time, I had a job at a biotech company, but but all of that really convinced me. One, I wasn't so interested in the science as much as I was interested in the application of all that scientific knowledge towards human disease. So that made medical school made more sense to me. And that I just did not want to work in a crazy restaurant in the back in the kitchen where people were screaming and yelling and throwing things. But as it turns out, I decided to go into surgery. So medical school was a lot of fun in Boston. And I found surgery there, which
So surgery is a bit like the restaurant without good food.
and a lot of, well, the swear words are there too, I guess, but not in so many different languages. But yeah, it's a fast-paced environment. I think I thrive in that. I enjoy that. I definitely liked the people, and then came back to California for general surgery at UCSD. After 5 years of that, fell in love with the practice of Bard Cosman, who was the only colorectal surgeon at UCSD at the time. And so applied to colorectal and went to WashU in St. Louis, finished there. That was phenomenal. That's kind of where I had the decision to go into academics. I'm not sure I was convinced about that until I hit WashU, worked with Ira Codner and Jim Fleshman, and then took my first job at UCSF, was there for a few years, worked with Julio Garcia Aguilar and Mika Varma, and then came back to UCSD, and that's where I've been since 2004.
So when you, you weren't full on in terms of doing surgery from the very outset, before you ever went to college or medical school. Did it, what tipped you towards the surgery? Was it just your medical student experiences, or?
When I was in high school, my uncle had a heart attack, and I was 16, and my mom wanted me to fly with her to go see him in LA. We were in the Bay Area, so we flew out there. And he was pretty sick. He was intubated in the ICU, and I remember being in that moment, and I can even remember it today, where the lights and the doctors and the chaos and the unrest and the patient there being my uncle, and seeing everyone around me crying and so upset. But there was a certain amount of comfort in that zone. I don't know what it was. It felt like a home. Something felt right about that environment. And that was, at the time, I don't think I realized I wanted to be a doctor, but looking back on it, I can absolutely identify that moment, standing there looking at my uncle and knowing and feeling just something right, something like that's where I belonged.
When you were, that sounds like the archetypal example for the personal statement, doesn't it? When you were applying for residency, was that story in the personal statement?
No, it just didn't. It didn't connect with me. Yeah. In my personal statement, it was more about, I've done all these other things, and I've tried to go all these other routes of being a chef or being in biotech and as a scientist, and none of those things resonated with me as much as being with people, treating human disease, and applying some of that science to patients.
And I'm guessing throughout, you've extraordinarily successful career in your to date, and more to come, no doubt. But I'm guessing you had mentors along the way.
Many.
So who were they?
It's interesting. I have, I think, a lot of mentors for a lot of different things in life, probably like most of us, personal life decisions and then professional life decisions. I would say one of my first recognizable mentors was a gynecologist during my general surgery training. I was scrubbed a couple times with her, and we were talking a lot about what I wanted to do, and she was just making chit chat with me while we're doing some pelvic exam. Who knows what I was doing with my attending and whatnot, but I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and she just somehow, that chemistry was there, and she helped me crystallize things, even in those 5-10 minute interactions. And then whenever I had a chance to sort of pick her brain, I would, about things. One of the most critical decisions she helped me make was I had just gotten married to my husband in residency, and I had applied to fellowship, and was trying to decide between, Wash U and at least leaving California and staying at a program in California. And she really said, gosh, you got to go to the best place you can get into. It's 1 year, your husband will be fine, your marriage will be fine, but don't let that, impact your decision to get the best possible education you can get in your fellowship. So I followed her advice, and that was probably, some of the best decisions one of the best decisions I made
So
in my life.
You did the 12-month long distance relationship thing?
Well, and then he became faculty at UCSD in cardiology, so it turned into 3 years. So a year at Wash U, and then I took a job at UCSF while he stayed at UC San Diego, and so we were apart about 3 years.
So were you intentional or just serendipitous about your choice of mentors?
Both. I would say later in life, I was more intentional. I realized the value of a mentor and a sponsor. And so then I sought out those people whose careers I admired, and would, call them and pick them up. And, some of it's about those people who reciprocate. So not every person I picked up the phone and called reciprocated with a desire to sort of help me with my decision making. But for the most part, I was very lucky to come across some really awesome men and women who were there for me. Marshall Orloff was one of my professors when I was a residency, tough guy, icon in American surgery, but he gave me advice about getting a nanny, like all the little things, like, that someone just needs to kind of push you over to make some of these decisions, get a live-in, do this. My chair at the time, Babs Musa, another tough guy, but gave me lots of advice about picking a partner in life and, making decisions and how you make, clinical judgments and how you deal with difficult patients. And that sort of bled into how to make difficult decisions in life in general. So I really benefited from lots of different men and women, not always in surgery, many of them outside of the field.
But, Babs Musa was a co-editor of a large textbook of surgery, Musa, Giles, and Kusheri. Alf Kusheri, of course, was a professor chair in Dundee, and Jeff Giles I worked for in Leeds. And his son was a swimmer, so he used to go in the mornings at 4:30 in the morning to the swimming pool to bring his kid there. And his secretary in the office used to complain that Jeff would do his dictation in the swimming pool, and all she could hear was the splashing of water. She couldn't actually hear anything. And then, 20 years later, when I was in Rochester, Marshall's son, Mark, was there. Who, I knew Marshall from when he was still working in UCSD, but I used to say to Mark, and I still say to Mark, I'm not really convinced he's genetically related to Marshall, because, he is the gentlest of souls that you could ever imagine.
Oh my God. Well, Dr. Orloff definitely had a soft side, and he's just one of those people that demanded you work hard as a resident and you be accountable. And those were the days. It was a different time. We did things differently, but I learned a lot from my experience and very much enjoyed those moments where I had him to myself as a chief resident around and learn. That's when they sort of kind of open up and tell you all kinds of little gems of knowledge they have to share with you from their years and their perspective. And it was amazing. And
he was definitely a guy who walked the walk. Anybody who's putting himself on 24/7 for a randomized trial of distal splenorenal shunt for active variceal bleeding, that is
and he
commitment.
Actually came in.
Oh yeah,
those cases were like the most amazing anatomy you would ever see. I mean, incredible stuff to operate on. Same thing with Babs Musa, all the pancreatic cases and challenging things that we did. Same thing with him. He would come in, he would do this amazing stuff. I mean, technically, just really amazing surgeon, and learned a lot from him. Alfred Cuschieri was our graduation speaker. And I remember him calling us Musa Vintage 90, whatever we were, 1999, 90, 2001, whatever we were. And it was, God, I mean, those were the greats, right? It was amazing.
Yeah, and Alf is still working, not clinically, but he's teaching. He's in Italy. He actually sent me some sort of communication, WhatsApp or something like that, maybe 3 weeks ago. Bizarre, etc. An extraordinary guy, actually.
Brilliant, right?
So, and then obviously great success in being a colorectal surgeon, and but also in the world of society politics. So what sent you down that line? Is it something that you just fell into, or somebody said you got to do this, or what?
Definitely, Dr. Fleshman, Dr. Kodner, Dr. Birnbaum all said it. You're joining ASCRS. You got to be a part of this. This is what you're going to do, and you're going to be on the awards committee. That's where you're going to get started. So that's what I did, right? I mean, you just kind of did that. In those days, you kind of did what your boss told you to do, and I did that. And of course, I wanted to join my own society, be a part of it, learn more, connect with my co-fellows. I absolutely loved that course during fellowship. Yeah. Something I think really good that our colorectal society does. You kind of bond your colleagues very early on. So it was always in my mind to be a part of this society as a member. I never imagined kind of growing in the society like I have. I think a lot of that just came from having an interest in certain things and wanting to see them happen in the society. So I wanted to help Peter Marcello build the new tech committee. So went down that path because at that time I was, really dabbling in robotics. And so worked with him on that. We created the new tech symposium. And then the next thing was, we need an IBD committee. We need surgical leadership. So a lot of the stuff just came from my desire to build something, not expecting anything in return, but I was really lucky. I had some good sponsors, I think, in the society who gave me opportunities to grow and take on more leadership roles.
And you're within touching distance of the very top of the tree now, did that ever factor in the latter, in the latter part of that rise? You're moving along, sitting in committees, contributing one thing or another. People tap you on the shoulder, and et cetera, et cetera. There must have come a point where you think, it's possible I might actually be the king of the hill here, or whatever, whatever the phrase is. Is that something that you thought, well, if it happens, it happens, or maybe I should focus on this or whatever? I mean, people are different in how they approach that, aren't they?
It wasn't necessarily a goal. It was a surprise. I didn't think the world was ready for an Indian woman to kind of be at that level. I just didn't. So I never imagined myself there. And it really goes to sort of say that you need to see people like you doing these things for you to imagine yourself doing them. So I never really imagined myself doing that. I've not had that ambition. But as I kind of moved along in this society from member to treasurer, there was always this goal to accomplish something at that level and get that done, which I think just kind of moved me to the next level. And then I saw, oh, hey, if I'm going to do this, then I want to make, I want to have this kind of impact. And so as I've moved along, I've thought a lot about what impact I want to have at each level. And I'm grateful that I've come as far as I have. I honestly didn't plan it out that way.
So it's interesting you describe it like that, because one of the questions I was going to ask you was, having reached whatever stage of your career you're at, do you have pearls of wisdom, advice, wisdom that you give people that say, Dr. Ramamoorthy, et cetera, et cetera. What's your elevator speech to young folks wanting to pursue a career in surgery?
It's hard work. I think a lot of things are hard work. When I finished college, my roommates, one, went into business, Goldman Sachs, the whole 9 yards. The other one became an attorney and, worked for the head attorney for Bank of America. So I watched these other women work almost, just about as hard as I did to get where they were. Yeah. So I think no matter what you do, you're going to work hard if you have these aspirations to take on these major responsibilities in life. And so hard work is, there is no other way to do it. I think there's no sidestepping hard work, right? It's always, there's no elevator, people will say, to success. It's always, you got to take the stairs. Yeah. And so if I were to tell people that, I do tell them that surgery is great. I absolutely love it. And you have to love it because it'll be hard, and it'll be hard to be successful at it. And people's lives depend on you. And there's a lot of stress there. And if that's something that still keeps you in the game, then do it, right? Because 55 years late, here I am 55 and I absolutely enjoy it. And so does Alfred Cuschieri, and so do you. And it's maybe not every single thing you enjoy, but you still enjoy being a surgeon. I enjoy being a surgeon. I still ask my kids, does anybody want to be a surgeon?
And what do they say?
Early on, they were like, no way, because they thought I spent too much time at work, not enough time at home with them doing the things that they wanted me to do as a mom. But now there's been definitely a pivot there where all of them are now considering medicine on some level. Wow. And maybe not necessarily. I have a middle one that maybe thinks surgery, an older one that, maybe thinks more neurosciences. But in the beginning, two doctors' kids originally were like, no way, not medicine. They've now kind of turned it around. And I had always hoped, and this was advice I got from a mentor, was, look, early on, your kids may not fully understand where you're going, what you're doing, but talk to them about it and show them your papers that have your name on it, and take them to conferences so they can see you giving a talk. And share with them your success so they really can appreciate what you're doing and why you're gone and feel a part of it, which was really great advice for me and made a big difference. I started bringing one of my kids to the conferences and stuff, and they'd sit in the back, and, they felt the pride. And I think that's important. So they understood. And now they've all changed.
Did they critique you?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Daughters can be harsh.
Yeah, that's a mother-daughter thing,
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, sometimes that's the honest people that you'll never, they unfiltered opinions, which is good.
Exactly. So I, when I was doing my extensive labyrinthine research for this conversation,
which probably lasted all of 2 minutes, I'm sure. I don't have too much to look into.
Excuse me. I watched I watched the YouTube video of from I think 2017 of the gentleman who had his robotic sigmoid, that story about the sigmoid colectomy, and the man who knew way too much about his own body for
he sure did.
So I mean, when I watched it, I thought, okay, I'm oscillating between thinking, it's good to have somebody who's engaged, and actually this guy is crazy, and it's actually quite helpful, but I really would rather somebody else looked after him, et cetera, et cetera. But there's no doubt that it's just the tip of the iceberg, that stuff, for sure. So where do you think you'll be 10 years from now? You'll be 65, as you say, and contemplating what you're going to do with your life. And I'll ask you in a minute what's changed in your career for better and worse, but where do you think we will all be in terms of, do you think that digital connectivity is going to be the norm?
I think some aspects of it will be, yes. I think the ability to provide better access through digital platforms will for sure get better and be the right thing to do, right? If access is a problem in this country, that is a solution to access. It's not the solution to all medical care, but it is a solution to some medical care. And as we think about an aging population and how to take care of those patients and how to take care of them at home, and how to apply a preventative medicine, sort of techniques to their care. I think that's where the digital age is going to make a big difference, right? My mom has bad Parkinson's. She's 88. It is a lot of work to get her to the doctor's office. Yeah. So as a family member, I'm super grateful for the ability to have telehealth and to converse with her doctors. I'm even more grateful for the services that can come to the house, the physical therapy, the traveling nurse, whatever it is that can come in the house and help her and keep her strong. But there are times she still needs to go to the hospital. And as much as we can try to keep her at home, that's our goal. And I got to imagine that's most patients' families' goals. So I think the way that we're going to be able to do that is through better technology.
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, you lose something with it as well, because, there's a lot of people go to their primary care doctor who never lays a hand on them. It's just tests right. And one thing or another. But on the other hand, if you can talk to your doctor instead of driving 2 hours, that's got to be a good thing. But
it is frustrating, John. I mean, I do get it, because we're in one of those specialties where people need to come in the clinic, right? And I have found that I'm getting bombarded with a lot more primary care requests in my clinic, because I'm the first doctor they're actually seeing in person, in 6 months, right? And so I'm noticing the edema on the lower extremities, and I'm picking up all this stuff, and it's like, oh my God, there's a lot of work here.
So an old friend of mine in England once said to me, surgeons are better grandparents than they are parents, which, I thought was an interesting observation, and something, I know I did badly on work-life balance, and some people are better than that. How would you grade yourself on would you give yourself, what grade would you give yourself in your work-life balance that you have achieved over your career?
I'll take an A. I work hard at that.
Yeah.
I probably work hard at that more than anything.
Yeah.
And it's been at a lot of personal sacrifice at times, and or professional sacrifice, depending on how you look at it. Things that I've had to give up that I thought I, would have helped me get to where I wanted to go or be what I wanted to be professionally, but had to give those things up. But I struggle, I think, like most people, men and women. I see my male fact. It's not just a female surgeon thing. I think we all struggle to be part of, present in our children and our spouses' lives and our friends' lives. And it's something you have to learn along the way. How do you set those guardrails up? How do you protect yourself and protect them? And it takes time. That's probably, along with my surgical skills getting better as I grew, so did my ability to manage my life properly, so that I was comfortable with the balance that I had, and that I felt like my family and my kids were getting the care that they needed. And that it also allowed me to pursue professionally the passion that I had for different things.
Yeah, it comes it comes to people with greater or lesser degrees of difficulty at different stages of lives. I mean, some people are not, they achieve that balance from the very outset. One of my conversations, I chatted to a head and neck surgeon who, a factor in choosing head and neck as a specialty was that he did not wish to be, running around like a headless chicken as an abdominal surgeon, which he saw in his And so he thought, head and neck is a little more controllable as a career. And the second thing that, in the conversations that I've done in this podcast is, this conversation would not have happened 20 years ago, because a discussion of such issues, was perceived as a mark of weakness, and, not something that you want to reveal. The only thing that would ever be acknowledged would be perhaps playing golf on a Friday afternoon. That was a sort of appropriately manly thing to do.
Or if it's something your kids did something amazing, then it would be something for you to sort of, like an ornament, or went into surgery even better, right? But it wasn't something you talked about. And, I think I'm not an A student every day in my life.
Sure,
Sometimes I absolutely fail my family, or I absolutely fail at work. But overall, I think the one thing that over the years you learn is to forgive yourself, right? You can only do so much and be so many places and be so many things to so many people.
So, seeing as you've almost given me a segue into this, I'm going to take my life into my hands and ask you about the issues of diversity, women in surgery, et cetera, et cetera. I say take my life into my hands because it's a difficult conversation to have if you're an old white guy like me, as something that I think Neil Hyman articulated. It's very difficult. I was reading the article that you wrote with Barbara Bass and Lisa McElmore, etc. Mm-hmm. And, a couple of things struck me about that was that, as you just pointed out, which was the segue, it's not easy for anyone, regardless of gender or ethnicity or whatever. You describe yourself as, is society ready for an Indian woman? I don't think Americans view you as an Indian woman, because I don't think Americans look at people like that. They define people, in my humble opinion, by accent.
Interesting.
It's that Sonia with the, I don't know how you spell her name, Sonia. That's how they, because you sound American, whereas I sound foreign, to people. I do think which is a good thing. Not the Indian bit, but they will look at the woman bit for sure. Mm-hmm. That's different. It's changed dramatically with, obviously, as it should have, etc. And, the Me Too movement, long overdue, etc., etc. But it's quite challenging now. I have a friend who was asked to do a panel for a webinar for a society. He was just asked to do it, to chair it, I should say, and he didn't choose any of the speakers. But he suddenly started getting assaulted because all of the speakers were men, and he said, "Hey, I didn't choose these people." How do we balance that?
Well, I think these things are meant to be hard. I don't necessarily expect anybody to have the right answer today or for any particular situation. I think it's this process that we're all going to go through, that we're going to learn. I think as an Indian woman, I have my biases. We all have it. There's no way we don't. And it's about the recognition of that, and how, as we get into positions where we make decisions about other people's lives, treatments, access, whatever resources, how cognizant are we of those biases, and can we catch ourselves enough to sort of recognize it and recognize the role it's playing in our decision making. Now, what you decide to do with that is a different thing, but it really is a social awakening. And And yeah, it might give us a little bit of analysis paralysis for a short period of time,
Yeah,
and I think it's not, we're not always going to make the right decision, right? I mean, necessarily choosing the person of color isn't always the right answer. I don't think so, right? We want to get to where Martin Luther King said we want to be judged on our character, right? The
yeah,
content of our character, and not about our color, our race. And so we have to get to that point. And we've had it one way for a long time. We're swinging the pendulum the other way. We're going to
yeah.
come back to the middle. And I think we're all going to be happy in that middle space, but it's going to take some time. And I know it's uncomfortable for you. It's uncomfortable for a lot of us. But I think we're going to get through that discomfort. I think we probably have to go through it to get to the good side.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure I would describe my stance as discomfort. The person who examined me in my fellowship in England in the 80s was a woman who had been vice president of the college, and she was a formidable surgeon, I can tell you that. And my first faculty colleague in London in the 1990s became president of the Royal College of Surgeons. She was an orthopedic surgeon, close friend of mine who we sadly lost last year from pancreatic cancer, Claire Marks. Now, Claire was interesting. She was an orthopedic surgeon, extremely smart, capable, lovely person, but was vehemently against any form of, and I'll use the term as a generic descriptor, but any form of positive discrimination. She felt that what she did was, as you just said, she was being judged on her skills and her character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what she wanted. She didn't want anybody to say, that's only because, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you're right. I mean, it's, everybody has their own story. I mean, I may be an old white guy, but here I'm an immigrant, believe it or not, and when I went to England from Ireland, they still had signs up saying, no blacks, dogs, or Irish.
Gosh.
I mean, it was, it was kind of an interesting. So, everybody has their own story because
Yep.
the world, the human being, the human condition, I should say, struggles with different.
Yes.
Wherever you are, it struggles with different.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that that's something that you can, as you say, it's not easy.
It's not easy. And wouldn't you love to be on the committee with all your friends, right?
Sure.
That's where the
Yeah.
word groupthink comes from. And so you're just like, we got to let this outlier in. This outlier is just going to change the conversation. And oh my gosh. But, we all know when you reach a certain point in your life, you're going to be better for that difficult conversation. And I'll tell you, one of the things I realized was bias, if you will, or we talk about, we want to have more, let's say, Black men in medicine.
Yeah.
Right. And how do we get there? Right. It's really hard to get them into our programs. Everybody wants the few super great medical students that are out there, but why are there so few? Okay, so let's dial it back. Let's go to the undergraduate. Why are there so few, Black men at the top colleges wanting to go to medical school? Well, then let's dial it back to the high school. So I served on our DEI committee at UCSD, and I realized how few Black students we had in general at the undergraduate campuses. And why was that the case? Well, because the best high school students went to the Harvards and the Yales.
Yeah.
They sort of had their pick of the place, right? So now you got to dial it back. So one of the things I decided to do was sit on a board for one of the local high schools, because for me, I realized that if when we talk about social determinants of health, you have to elevate the community, right? You can't just, for example, in our field, put a clinic in a disparate community and expect that everybody's going to be healthy after that. That's not how it works, right? You have to educate, and you have to give jobs, and you have to give benefits, and you have to elevate the parents and everybody to raise that community to where we want them to be. But I also, in high school, it's like, who becomes student body president? Who gets to be the lead in that play? who gets to do all of those special things that you get to put on your application that then gets you to those great schools, and who gets let into those great high schools and into those AP programs and blah, blah, blah. And so being in an affluent community and being someone who advocates for my kids and gets in there and works the high school, talks to the teachers, I realize, I'm creating, I'm part of the reason, I'm part of the problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to help my kids, but I understand that some kids don't have parents that do those things. And so going into that high school board made me want to, work on the DEI at the high school level, but then you keep dialing it back and you go back to just the fundamental things that people need to be educated, and we need to start this process very early in the next generation.
It is interesting. I don't know if you ever read or listen to Malcolm Gladwell and his work. I mean, I like to listen to him because he has a very interesting voice. So I listen to him by audiobook, etc. He's originally from Jamaica. He's brought up in England, but lives in Toronto. And he was commenting, and this is extraordinarily summarized and paraphrased, obviously, that in the US, assimilation of African Americans into society is heavily based on shade of darkness. The lighter, the easier it is to assimilate. And whereas in Jamaica, it's to an extent the opposite. Because the American experience is much more of, the more you look like your neighbor, the easier it is to succeed. Whereas in Jamaica, the lighter you are, the more it indicates that it came as a result of the slave owner buying a slave wife, which they did openly. It was done differently. So it's very interesting how these things emerge from a teleological standpoint. So it's a very serious and deep conversation we're getting into. So let me.
It's good stuff, though, right? I mean, we would have never had that 20 years ago, like you say. So I mean,
exactly.
It's part of all our conversations these days, and it's healthy. It's good.
So what are you good at?
Oh, I think I'm good at talking to people, figuring out problems, problem solving. I'm happiest when I'm doing that, when I find something that's wrong and I can fix it, kind of like being a surgeon, but in other aspects of my life as well. In my hospital work and the hospital administration work, I like finding problems that I can fix, that help people.
So there's a long way to go, of course. But how would you like to be remembered? And how do you think you will be remembered?
Gosh, yeah, I think back to the things that really matter in life. I would want to be remembered by my children as a great mom, as someone who supported them, helped them realize their dreams, help raise them to be good people. I would want to be recognized by my friends as a good, loyal friend, someone who would always be there for them, someone they can always pick up the phone and call, honest, trustworthy. And in my work, gosh, someone who just made people's lives better.
Yeah, I think I think one of the things that people realize in your work is that 6 months after you've left, they definitely won't remember how you spelled your name.
And that's okay, right? I mean,
exactly.
It's like that's life, right? That's okay. And maybe you did your job if that's the case, right? Maybe you train a ton of people and you've brought along a lot of really the next generation of faculty into colorectal, John. And I think that's the legacy, if you will, and I mean no disrespect, but our children in colorectal, you want them to carry on this specialty and all of the curiosity about the science and the research and all of the important protections for our specialty and advocacy for patient care and just the right people doing the right thing. And we want to maintain that. When you think what our forefathers did in our society so many years ago when they formed it, how brilliant were they, right? They gave us a board, they established our society. We have an incredible endowment, which we can, use to fund research and all different kinds of projects that we see today. And colorectal is every bit a part of kind of all of the great new stuff that has happened in the last 50 years, right? Transanal surgery, robotic surgery, screening, prevention. I mean, we've just done everything. Our people are really amazing. And so you want that to carry on into the future, despite all the challenges in healthcare today, which is frightening.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is interesting. I mean, I do think sometimes, one of my earliest bosses once said to me, listen, there's nobody in this room here called Mozart. He said, none of us are geniuses. He said, so, the only people that will remember you are your patients and your students. And he said, and that's as it should be. And I think that's probably true. Your Twitter profile describes you as a donut lover.
So totally true.
Yeah.
I wish that weren't true. I just had like an amazing donut the other day and I was raving about it. What can I say? I have a problem and I fully admit it.
I was only just passing by that, but also a lifelong learner. I assume that's why you're doing an MBA.
Finished the MBA.
Did it, I should say.
Yeah, finished the MBA and I loved it. I loved just thinking about something other than surgery, but something that would still apply to medicine. Oof, awesome.
So what do you do when you're not being incredibly impressive and important and operating and stuff like that? What are your hobbies?
I am hobbyless.
Hobbyless. You just eat donuts,
I don't know. When I have free time, do I focus on one thing? No, and that's probably my problem in life, right? My hobbies have been my children. My hobbies have been my friends, my work, my projects my little projects that I like that are mostly work related. Making my husband happy, us thinking about, our kids. It's just, I don't know. I wish I had a car hobby like you. I really do. I wish I could focus and then just have one thing that I really like. The one thing I just did recently, I went with my son to NYU. He's going to be a student in the fall. So we kind of took this weekend and went to New York, went to this donut bar that was incredible.
Back to the donuts.
Greenwich Village Donut Bar. Anybody? It is so good. It had the best French cruller that I ever had in my life. Yeah. But reconnected with a gallery that probably 20 years ago, talk about delayed satisfaction in medicine, but 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, when I went with my husband to Paris, we didn't have any kids. And I found this artist that I loved. She was an American artist, but she was living in Paris, and they had her stuff in this little corner gallery near Notre Dame. And I couldn't afford it at the time. It was like $500. And my husband and I are like, oh, that's way too much to spend. We're not doing that. And I've kind of followed her the last 20 years and just have never had a chance to go back. And every time I've gone back to Paris, maybe once or twice, I go to that gallery and the price keeps going up. And so this last time I told my son, this is the only gallery in the United States that has her stuff. So let's go. So we go there, and he and I both fell in love with the same kind of etching, and I ended up buying it. So that's going to be my hobby, John. I'm going to be an art collector of Lynn Shaler art because I love her stuff.
And what does it cost now?
Do I have to say it? I haven't told my husband about it yet, but anyway, okay.
Well, the good news is nobody will ever see this podcast.
It's an early birthday present. It wasn't that much. It's like $3,000. It wasn't that bad, right? It's not bad.
Not bad in 20 years. you know.
Not at all. And
But
I ended up getting a small one first because the bigger ones are now 10,000. So, it's like, what an idiot I am. If I had just invested that $500 back then, I would have been further, and I would have had something beautiful to look at in my house, right? That I very much
Exactly.
love and
Yeah.
enjoy everything about what she does. And she reminds me a lot of Ed Hopper. And so I
Yeah.
just, I'm going to get into art. I'm going to do some other stuff, but I'm hobbyless at the moment.
Oh, well. So we're close to finishing here. So I'm going to ask you a series of, this is the cheesy sign-off bit, where I ask you a series of quick questions.
Okay.
You do not get time to think about these. You have to just give me the answer.
Okay.
There are no correct or incorrect answers, although I know the correct answer. Okay. Ready?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Beatles or Stones?
Beatles.
McDonald's or Burger King?
McDonald's.
Mac or PC?
PC.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Coke or Pepsi?
Neither.
Football or baseball?
Oh, football.
Home or away?
Home.
Here we go. Thank you, Sonia. It's been great fun. I appreciate it. I got to say that I am so delighted to see everything that's happened to you. I think our society is in safe hands, and I look forward to seeing greater and greater things from you over the years to come. I really appreciate you spending the time today.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. So thank you for having me.
All righty.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.